Well, today we'll talk a little bit about the Ruger American Gen 2. Howdy folks, welcome back to Raffshaw Outdoors. Today we're gonna talk a little bit, do a little bit of a review, I guess, of the Ruger American Gen 2 rifles. Gosh, 2012, 13, somewhere in there, Ruger came out with the American model as kind of a answer to come up with a budget priced rifle, something a little cheaper. They had the M77 Hawkeye with control round feed, blade eject, the LC6 trigger, but you know, they're a little more, they're just a tiny step behind the current production Winchester Model 70s. Some people will disagree with me on that. Price point, they're a step behind a little bit. Very, very good rifles. Very serious big game rifles. But, you know, it's controlled round feed, costs a little bit more money to put together, to manufacture. They needed an answer. They looked at what Winchester did in 1964 when Winchester completely revamped the Model 70, went from a controlled feed to a push feed, and that was one of the biggest mistakes Winchester ever made. But so Ruger didn't want to do that. They came out with a whole different rifle. They came out with the American. They made that for quite a few years. But oh shoot, I'm gonna get all kinds of crap for this, but I don't know exactly the year they came out with the Gen 2, but they definitely came up with a few modifications that the Gen 1s needed. I guess now, since it's staying up, I don't need that piece of wood. You know, for a budget rifle, it'll run you about $600, a little more depending on where you live, maybe a little less. A few things. I don't have a whole lot of experience with the Gen 1s, but a few things that I do know that they updated was the comb on the buttstock, and if I'm not mistaken, that is adjustable. You take this, screw out this sling swivel stud, and then the back of the buttstock slides out and you can adjust comb height. So that's something that's kind of neat. They did a little bit more to the stock. They put this, shoot, I don't even know what that coloring is called, but my Winchester Model 70 Extreme Weather MB has a similar looking stock, so that kind of upped it some. They went with a factory installed Picatinny rail, so that makes mounting a scope a lot quicker. There's a couple different variations. This is the standard version. Spiral fluted barrel. That's supposed to help with heat dispense, whatever that word would be. It gets rid of heat faster. Since it's spiraled instead of straight, you get even more surface area. They all come with a muzzle brake, but they don't come with a muzzle protector, or with a thread protector. So if you don't like muzzle brakes, you're gonna have to buy a thread protector. And they're not always the same color as the Cerakote finish, which that's something I wanted to talk about. The Gen 1s were just a matte black finish. These are Cerakote, which resists corrosion a lot better. Bolt handle, slightly oversized. One thing I'm not a huge fan of is the way their magazine sticks out the bottom, and it is kind of tricky to get in there. For short action, it says the magazine that comes with it is a 3-round magazine. It says 308 multi, so it's basically anything in that whole class of 308, 6.5 Creedmoor, all the Creedmoors, well, anything in the 308 family. That's a .473 diameter head on the case. A little tricky to get in there. It's not like an AR where you just stick it straight in. You gotta come in at an angle, and then come in and kind of work it back and forth, and it clicks in. A little tricky, but you figure it out eventually. So that is that's something. If you're used to hinged floor plate rifle, that might take a little getting used to. It is handy that your cartridges are all in one place. Just don't lose your magazine. Another upgrade they did was they put a 3-position tang safety on here, which is really, really handy, especially if you're a Winchester Model 70 guy, if you're a Hawkeye fan, Kimber Model 84s. The 3-position safety really is a nice touch. It's something cool to see on a budget rifle. If you don't know how they work, all the way back is locks the bolt, which is really handy if you are hunting on foot. If you're still hunting in the Midwest, or if you're up in Alaska, kind of going through, especially southeast, that rainforest, all kinds of stuff that you can hook your bolt on. It'll open up the bolt. Even in the interior tundra, not so much, but alders, if you've ever hunted in alders or tried to get through them, I know there's like 20 different species of alder, but some of that stuff that grows along the creeks and stuff is just getting through is almost impossible. And then southeast too, Devil's Club, if you don't know what that is, it's not something you want to find out. Well, I guess you should know what it is before you grab it, but nasty stuff. So that's where a 3-position safety that locks the bolt down is handy. Now, I know there are different rifle manufacturers that have 2-position safety that does lock the bolt. The original Remington 700s, when they came out in 1962, they had a 2-position safety and safe lock the bolt. But then to load it and unload it, you had to be on fire, which I believe the Tikkas are that way. The Winchester XPR, which is their budget version, another push feed, of course. It's a 2-position, but they have a little button you can push while it's on safe to unlock the bolt. But Ruger did, I'd say, probably the best out of all budget rifles, a true 3-position safety. So, and then second position, it is a little, there you can see I went all the way to fire. But second position, now we're still on safe. We can run the bolt for loading and unloading. And then all the way forward is fire, and there's a red tab on the back. If you're all the way back, bolts locked, safety. You got 2 white lines Push it forward, you got one white line, so you can run the bolt. So yeah, there's that. I want to talk about the trigger a little bit. Ruger came out with, they call it the Marksman trigger in the Gen 1 American. It's very, very similar to the Savage AccuTrigger, where you have that little blade in the middle of the trigger face and that you take up to contact the actual trigger face. Guys that have shot these Gen 2s will say, boy, they come from the factory. They're usually adjustable 3 to 5 pounds. A lot of them come from the factory at 5 pounds. This one included. You know, that is probably probably about the only bad thing I have to say about it. You know, the whole reason for the AccuTrigger or the Marksman trigger with the blade that you take up through the trigger face was to make a very light trigger that was still safe. Well, when it's 5 pounds, you kind of defeated the whole purpose of having that blade in the trigger face. So that is probably my biggest gripe about them. You can, now to adjust it yourself, there's an action screw here, and then there's one behind the magazine release, which is a kind of a bugger to get at. I've seen some guys will actually take this magazine release out, but then you got a spring and all that. So that's something that, you know, if you don't feel confident, I would have a gunsmith do it. I wanted to come back here to the recoil pad. You know, it leaves a little bit to be desired. It's fairly soft. You know, but if you're shooting anything smaller than a 30-06, that's all the recoil pad you need. Now this particular rifle is a 22 Creedmoor, so the muzzle brake is completely unnecessary. Doesn't need to be on there. So I definitely would want to put a thread protect. Take the muzzle brake off, throw it in the woods, like I have with every other muzzle brake I've had, and put a thread protector on. I don't like muzzle brakes. I don't like how they direct gas back around you. Yes, they help with recoil, but a 22 Creedmoor does not have recoil in the first place. I mean, obviously there's a little bit, but you know, it's such a light. You do not need a muzzle brake on a 22 Creedmoor. That is something, yeah, looks cool, but when you're shooting in the field, not at the bench, and even at the bench, if you got a lot of people around and they're not all wearing your hearing protection, boy, you're gonna have not many friends. But so that's one thing. I wish that they would send a thread protector with them. A little bit about the push feed. I know a lot of people are gonna eat me alive for saying this. For a serious big game rifle, I much prefer a control round feed. Now, interestingly enough, the Ruger American Gen 2 is the top selling rifle in America right now. Full diameter bolt, which is nice. They're a little gritty compared to like a Tikka, but you shoot them, that's when they're brand spanking new. You can get some, what do they call it, action polish or something. It's not sandpaper, but it's similar. You can clean them up a little bit to make them smoother. Really, what I've found, especially like with the Hawkeyes too, they're a little grittier than the Model 70 Winchester, but shoot, you put 2 boxes of shells through them and they're just as slick as a Model 70. So take your guns out and shoot them, people. One thing that is really interesting about the 3-lug bolt face, or 3-lug bolt, is that it allows you to have a 60-degree bolt lift as opposed to a 90-degree bolt lift. A lot of people really like that. So that is something that, I've never seen a control round feed with a 60-degree bolt lift. They might be out there. I'd have to do some more research, I guess. But the 60-degree bolt lift is handy because it really, you get a lot more scope clearance between the bolt and the bolt handle in your scope, obviously. Now, you know, a lot of people will say that the correct way to run the bolt is with your palm and your fingers and run it forward. I don't know if I want to say that's the correct way, because 90% of people, seriously, if you take a shot at a, you know, are going to grab it like this and away you go. I do that, especially when I'm hunting. I tend to grab it like this and continue. So maybe some people will say that's not right. Whatever, it doesn't really bother me that much. But that is something that is sure handy about these rifles. Since there are people that are going to jump all over me because I prefer control round feed, I will say one of the benefits of the push feed is a 60-degree bolt lift. Another one that is not really, I don't want to say not applicable, but for the most part it is not applicable, is the push feeds, because they encase the entire head of the cartridge when it's chambered, can handle higher pressure loads. For most hunting cartridges, a controlled round feed with a cone breech can handle them just fine, but that is an advantage with a push feed. It can handle a higher, it's technically a stronger action, can handle higher pressures. Now with the new Federal, that alloy stuff, I forget what they call it. The 7mm backcountry, they came out with it, and now they're making 6.5 Creedmoors with, I think it starts with an A something. But it's an alloy case that you can run the pressures crazy high. Then yeah, push feed might be able to handle that better. But I guess for accuracy wise, with now a lot of people, this one took a little bit of break-in. I started out with 80 grain ELDX 22 Creedmoor. I would say that was kind of my break-in period. Wasn't getting the accuracy I hoped for, was getting a little upset with the trigger being as heavy as it is. But now this thing does shoot at 100 yards a quarter MOA. You can make, and that was off of bags, it wasn't even off of a lead sled. At 100 yards, you can get all three, a 3-shot group to touch. So they are, for, you know, a budget priced rifle, very accurate. If that is your, now if you're shooting at like a coyote or something, yeah, coyote is a lot smaller than an elk. So you need, that is nice to have that much accuracy. For a kick around, you know, truck gun, I guess, or trapline rifle, you know, if you're out in the bush clearing, or, you know, doing trail work or something, maybe you're supplying your camps or whatever, this wouldn't be a bad rifle to for that application, I think. Like I said, for a serious big game rifle, I prefer control round feed. Winchester Model 70, Ruger Hawkeye, Kimber 84, although I've never had a Kimber. I've looked at them actually. Really, when I bought my 30-06, I was really debating between a Kimber 84. Was it 84 or 8400? That or the Winchester, and ended up going with the Winchester. But I have heard that Kimber barrels can be touchy. Sometimes you'll get a good one. Sometimes you'll get one that can't group for anything. But anyway, that's something I've heard. So, but again, for the Ruger American, for somebody that you know, doesn't hunt a whole lot. If I was going to go on a real dedicated, you know, once in a lifetime big game hunt, this probably wouldn't be the rifle I would take. Again, I don't care for the magazine sticking out the bottom because it's harder to carry with your hand right in front of the trigger guard with this thing sticking out the bottom like that. You know, I guess you can carry it here, but you know, for you know, if I was going to go on a Dall sheep hunt, and I would or even a moose hunt in Alaska, this probably wouldn't. I'd probably want something with controlled round feed. Not saying push feeds are necessarily bad. You know, this is fine. I prefer control round feed. But for a kick around, like I said, depending on your state laws, you know, can't have it loaded on a four-wheeler all the time, but you know, some states you can. Something like that, you know, something for a, you know, a coyote rifle, kick around rifle. Boy, these are a pretty solid option. And really for you know, even Midwest deer hunting, if you can use rifles in your jurisdiction, I guess would be the word, they would work great for that. If you're really not expecting shots past 300 yards, which 300 yards is closer than most people think, but I mean, it's still a decent distance away. But what a lot of people guess is 100 yards is actually 150, 175, sometimes even 200 yards. So, you know, they are accurate. They are. So if you're just a meat hunter who doesn't really want to get into guns and ballistics all that much, just wants a decently reliable rifle to get some venison for the winter, this would be a fine rifle for that. One thing about these synthetic stocks that they run and the Cerakote finish, you don't have to be quite as careful with them to keep them from rusting or getting scratched, obviously. So that is a really handy thing for a, you know, I don't want to say beater, but you know, kind of a kick around truck gun type thing, you know. So anyway, yeah, I guess that will be the review for the Ruger American Gen 2. And I'm Pete Refshaw with Refshaw Outdoors. Keep your powder dry.